How did Nintendo fare in 2023, and what are some of our favorite Nintendo holiday memories? It's the LP Podcast. Hello, and welcome back to Tuesday. Today's the day of the week where I get to play Nintendo games and talk a lot, but that's no different than any other day. Focusing in on the talking today, of course, as it is Tuesday, I'm LP, your host, and we're going to cover the last week's news in Nintendo. Starting us off here, F-Zero 99 has introduced a classic mode in its next major update. This is something that I know a lot of people had asked for. What with F-Zero 99 seeing the success that it had, it honestly introduced a significant amount of people to the franchise, which was great in and of itself, but veterans of it missed the old controls. More than the controls, they missed the old style of race, as I understand it. Now, when I mention older veterans of the franchise, I'm not one of them. I grew up with the N64, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I didn't really have a huge amount of opportunity to garner any real level of familiarity with F-Zero, beyond, of course, playing with Captain Falcon on Smash Brothers. So, you see where I'm coming from. Either which way, though, looking here at the article, it looks like the first thing we notice about Classic Race Mode is that it maintains the Super Nintendo's original 4:3 aspect ratio. The widescreen edges now replaced with generic borders. The UI has been adjusted as a result to fit the narrower screen space. So, I mean, largely a visual thing off the top of the bat, but it would seem that there is at least enough demand for something like this to make it a reality. The mode still takes place online against other players, but limits the number of entrants to 20, down from the main mode's titular 99. Interesting. Also, of course, as you might imagine, courses have been shrunk to accommodate for the smaller amount of players. So still plenty of elbows out driving as you attempt to charge through the pack. So, very good for classic fans. Very good for new fans who perhaps wanted a way to check out how it used to be played, or as the purist would say, how it should be played. Speaking of classics, we talked about this last week. Ocarina of Time turned 25 years old. Again, happy birthday. And YouTuber Ron Link, RWANLINK, I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation of it, created an amazing animation of Ocarina of Time in Studio Ghibli style. If you're not aware of it, I will link it below, but you need to watch it. We see a quick little short snippet here of this. Truly incredible. Truly incredible. As I understand it, this was actually created in a game engine. This was not just a pure animation, but instead an emulation, for lack of a better word, because at the end of the video, Ron Link actually takes control of Link, the exact Link you see here that looks like a hand-drawn character, and moves him about at will throughout the world, or at least throughout the part of the world that the video takes part in. I'm not going to spoil anything for you in case you haven't seen it, but I have watched it a good 4 or 5 times now, and I have to say it is absolutely excellent. I had never been familiar with this creator prior to this showing up on my homepage, and they do a ton of great work. This specific video is just a slight departure from their ordinary style, which I would consider more hyper-realistic style stuff. Again, always inside of Unreal Engine. They obviously have a huge amount of familiarity with it, but I hope that we get more of this from them later on down the line. Speaking of getting more, we're getting more additions to NSO Plus Expansion Pack. We are getting Jet Force Gemini. Yes, one of many's favorite Rare titles. Not a game that I actually had the privilege of playing. Well, I shouldn't say that. Not that I had the privilege of owning. I did play it. I grew up with some neighborhood friends who did, in fact, have this game, but it was rated teen. And if you knew my mother, you'd know that teen means it's too mature for 12-year-old LP. Either way, I know a lot of people are very excited about this, so we'll make note of it because it is a big deal, right? Rare and Nintendo produced a lot of great work, especially the Banjo-Kazooie series, and I'm sure Jet Force Gemini is very much the same. You'll remember, in fact, in Banjo-Tooie, there are a couple of Easter eggs of Jet Force Gemini inside of Bottle's house. Fun fact for you that. And that may be the last time I've even thought of Jet Force Gemini, was the last time I played Banjo-Tooie. Either which way, I digress. People are excited about that, and I'm excited for them. With this in mind, though, the acquisition or inclusion of Jet Force Gemini and NSO, Nintendo is launching an adults-only app for Nintendo Switch Online in Japan. This is what is required for Jet Force Gemini, as well as other titles like GoldenEye 007. So Japan does not use the same rating system as America or as the Western world. I know there's several different rating systems, but the one that Japan uses places the Z rating on Jet Force Gemini, and that means 18 and up. That means adults only. So they have to create an alternate app for those people. Very crazy, to be honest with you. It's funny because some people think of Japan and they think of like, I don't know, they think of like overly suggestive anime characters and stuff like that. But then they have very cartoon-like violence. Is really not even all that bad from what I remember Jet Force Gemini, and consider that to be too much for children. Who's to say what is right or wrong? It's just interesting to me, and definitely not something we'll see in America, I wouldn't imagine, unless, of course, they consider bringing games like, I don't know, Conker's Bad Fur Day over. So, we'll see. Speaking of niche games like Conker's Bad Fur Day, though, Suika, the watermelon game, 4 million units sold. Very impressive. You know, for a relatively, I don't know if simple is the right way to put it, for a relatively, well, we'll call it exactly that. Fine. Why, let's not mince words. It's not a huge depth game, but it's doing very, very well. And I think we should all be very happy for it. It released on October 20th, so 4 million units in just 1 month. A little over. Very, very, very impressive. Goodness gracious. And that actually wraps up all of the real news headlines for Nintendo for the week. Not a huge week in terms of Nintendo news. And my job here is not to over-sensationalize or to give you false headlines about stuff that doesn't matter, because God knows that I could do that. I could give you the latest and greatest rumors, but that's not necessarily important. All right, we're talking about just the news headlines, what's actually the truth, what's out there. And now, moving into the next segment, what else is out there is holiday season. I don't know about you, but when Thanksgiving comes and passes in the United States, it's officially Christmas. All right? The entire month of December, and I guess the end of November. No, November ends with Thanksgiving. All right, that's it. It's now December. We are in holiday mode, and I want to talk about the holiday season. In fact, over the next 4 episodes, I will talk about a specific holiday Nintendo memory of mine. Each one different each time, and hopefully we get some guests on as well to share theirs. Something tells me we do have a few guests lined up, so keep an eye out for that. Anyways, for our first holiday memory, I am going to go all the way back in time to the late 90s. I believe it was 1997, perhaps 1998. I was 5 or 6 years old, and I desperately wanted a Nintendo 64. My mother and I would walk to preschool. She was a teacher. I was a student, obviously. No, I was the dean. And we would go to preschool. On the way to the preschool, there was a Toys R Us on our walk. So if we had time before and usually after, we would stop at the Toys R Us and just look around. It was a great time. It was back in the era of neck pain, where you would just stare up at the screen pasted on the wall with the controller down here. You're 4 years old. You're like 6 inches tall. You got to turn your neck all the way 270 degrees just to get any sort of glimpse of the screen. Anyways, my mother and I, we would go do this, and I fell in love with Super Mario 64. Absolutely adored it. It was great. The freedom that it afforded my young mind, it was, well, not to be overstated. Anyways, fast forward beyond that, Christmas 1997. It had been a little bit after the N64 had released, and I had asked for it for Christmas. I had asked for it for my birthday. It had not yet came. However, one Christmas, a box showed up under the tree. Now, this was not Christmas on the day of specifically, but in the lead up to it, where we would place, we'd place presents under the tree. Santa, the big jolly man, would dump his gifts overnight, but we would still have sporadic gifts from family members, from parents, siblings, whatever would go into the tree. And one particular box caught my eye. One pleasantly, how we say, rectangular package sitting under there. I didn't know what to expect beyond that I knew what the box looked like, roughly shape and size. How did I know this? Well, I would take measurements at Walmart. Not scientific measurements, right? I'm 5 years old. I'm not necessarily I'm not an engineer, all right? But I remember I would go there and I would look in the glass where they had the boxes, the N64 boxes, and I would say, oh, okay, so that's like up to here on my leg, up to yay high. That's how tall a box is. Sure as heck, when I got home, I would tilt that box up. It was the exact same size. It was the exact same size, but I was not convinced, all right? Thankfully, I had a friend up the street who did have an N64, and you know what I did? I'd go over to his house and play it, yes, but not this day. This day, I went over to there to hold it, to cradle it, to caress it, to weigh it with my hands and gauge how heavy I thought it was. After I felt like I had a good enough estimate and had him do the same, of course, we both went back over to my house to test the same on the box. It felt like I was getting an N64. Oh, I was so happy, so freaking excited. Finally, an N64. After like a year or so of waiting for it, it was gonna happen. It was a shoo-in. There could be no doubt. Push comes to shove, Christmas morning, I had beeline it right for that box. Of course, you know, I'm gonna get that box. I mean, that's what I'm here for, man. Rip it open. Paper flying everywhere, ribbons adorning the screens of the TV and the couches beside me, to what before mine eyes disappear. What a fire truck. Whoa, what is this? No, this is not an N64. It's some sort of model. A fire truck model. I can't put this together. I'm 5.5, 6 years old. I can't. This has for 12 and up. What is this? I was heartbroken. Very disappointed. For all of like 5 seconds before I noticed another box from Santa, exact same shape and size, that it did indeed have the N64 inside. Ugh. The roller coaster of emotions I remember feeling over the course of that like week and pinnacle at the day of Christmas was extreme. But a great memory nonetheless, because I do recall also getting this little like plush, like it was not like a beanbag, right? Like not like a beanbag, but it was like some sort of like squishy thing for you to sit upon. And I remember sitting on that at like 4 a.m. Christmas Day, playing Super Mario 64 and having the time of my life as I died over and over again. Excellent time. And of course, I grew to love the N64, and eventually, yes, you'd be surprised to hear this, did in fact beat Super Mario 64. Yes, indeed I did. Oh, a tall task, I'm certain of it. But a great memory all the same. I'm curious, what are one of your favorite holiday memories? Don't share all of them just yet, because we're going to do the same thing every week for the next few weeks, like I mentioned. But if you have, let's say, your earliest Nintendo-related holiday memory, because that's the one that I shared with you now, what was it? Was it also an N64? Was it maybe older? Are you of an elder generation? Are you one of the ancients dealing with the Nintendo or the Super Nintendo? The Atari. Not a Nintendo, but still, you get where I'm coming from. Either which way, let me know. I'd be very interested to see that. Furthermore, moving on. Now, this is not the end of the year, very much how, you know, November, early December is not technically holiday season for everyone. It is for me, but not for everyone. It is also time to start talking about how Nintendo did for the year. And user PMC131810S38715, such a beautiful name, kindly put together this list for us on Reddit of what Nintendo did this year. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, of course. These are just some of the, I guess, the bigger mainline titles that most people will be familiar with. And there's a number of other things we could throw in there. But I'd be curious to review this and kind of talk about Nintendo's year in review. And we'll probably do this a little bit more in the following weeks, because 2023 is not yet over, though it is largely wrapping up. You know what I'm saying? I don't think there's anything crazy scheduled for December, but we could get some crazy announcements, which I think would kind of play into this. Anyways, looking at the games, we had Fire Emblem Engage. I've talked about this before. It's a great game. I love Fire Emblem. I still haven't beat Fire Emblem Engage. I'm about 3/4 through it. I really need to pick it back up and finish that, but it is a great game. Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe. This is the first on this list of what we'll identify as a trend, if you will, of remaking old titles and doing it quite well. For the purposes of this, I'm going to give Fire Emblem Engage. That's a plus. Like, yes. Kirby Return to Dreamland. I want to give it a plus because it's a remake, though. I feel almost compelled to just give it like a flat. It's not a negative. But it's also not just average. It's more positive than it is average. So if there's something between like and it's there. It's still good. It's still good. It's great. It's a great game. But anyways, moving on. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. All right. So if Fire Emblem Engage was Tears of the Kingdom is rah. You know what I'm saying? It is 2 thumbs way up for our leading lady. Anytime you get a brand new 3D Zelda game, it's game over. All right, all the lights go out, children rush the streets, the sewers flood, everything goes to heck and back because everyone's playing Zelda. Great game. I'm still playing it. Actually, I'm still Let's Playing it on the channel, over 200 episodes now. But it's a great game, and it's my vote for Game of the Year. Just because of one, yes, my innate bias towards Zelda titles. It's my favorite franchise. But 2, just the amount that they were able to build off of its predecessor, Breath of the Wild. I didn't think that they'd be able to innovate as much as they did, right? When I know that there was a sequel to Breath of the Wild coming, I thought that, sure, you do pretty much the same stuff. You have the same Sheikah slate, whatever, maybe like expand the shrines and stuff. No! They flipped the whole thing on its head while still using the same map and then giving it the triple-decker action. All right, what the cheeseburger was as Breath of the Wild, then came the Big Mac of Tears of the Kingdom, and gosh darn it, it was freaking delicious. Going down the line, Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp, as you might imagine from Reboot being in the title, it's another, in the same vein as Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe, remake. I didn't actually get the opportunity to play this one, but I do know that it was received very well by fans of the series. Metroid Prime Remastered. I did get to play this one. In fact, I purchased a copy of Metroid Prime for the GameCube as well as this at the exact same time. Oh, because it took this releasing for me to realize that I had lost my Metroid Prime disc. So, for that reason alone, I'm a big fan. Furthermore, the game itself looked very good, played very well. There was a few quality of life changes. Ultimately, 2 thumbs up for that. Pikmin 1 and 2 re-releases, great. Absolutely great. They had a physical as well as a digital release. I unfortunately did not get the physical release, though I do still hope to do that because I am a massive Pikmin fan. I mentioned that Zelda is my favorite franchise, but Pikmin is right up there, I assure you. So there could be no other rating for Pikmin 1 and 2 re-releasing than 2 thumbs way up. The only problem is that I have not yet convinced Serena, my wife, to play Pikmin 2. She's played and beaten every other Pikmin game, but she is afraid of Pikmin 2. It is a little unforgiving, a little trollish at times, and definitely difficult, but I do hope that I, and maybe you leave her some encouraging comments at some point, can help encourage her to give it a shot. Pikmin 4. Excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Almost as big of a deal, in my opinion, as Tears of the Kingdom. Arguably a bigger deal, but just for different reasons, okay? Pikmin is a franchise devoid of the proper amount of love, if I may be so bold, both from the general public as well as the publisher, Nintendo, because they don't get enough installations, right? We get a new Pikmin game like every 10 friggin' years, man. I mean, it's just bananas, to be honest with you, how infrequently or how long it's taken between 2 and 3 and then 3 and 4. Yes, we got the Pikmin 3 Deluxe Remaster on the Switch in between 3 and 4, but that doesn't really count. No, it doesn't really count. That being said, for what it was, Pikmin 4, absolutely fantastic. I loved it so much, and what's more, it was a long game. Far longer than I thought it would be, to be honest with you. I remember playing through it. My wife and I, Serena, did a Let's Play. Starting at like episode 20-ish, I was like, all right, well, we're about to wrap it up. The game's getting close to the end. It feels like it's the end. Lo and behold, the game went 60-something episodes, all right? We spent like 40 hours in that. Sure, we almost 100%ed it, essentially, but the point remains that it is a great game, but not at all too hand-holdy, and it's very, very dense with content and ways to enjoy it, all right? If you like the story mode stuff, great. If you like the side quest stuff, even better. If you like random freaking crap on the side that doesn't actually influence everything, but helps you out in the end, you go talk to that Elder Sageleaf and you have a great time too. Moving on. Detective Pikachu returns. I am not someone who has played any of the Detective Pikachu games. I have watched all of maybe 25 minutes of the Detective Pikachu movie. That being said, I understand that this was relatively well received, so that's cool. Same vein, Bayonetta Origins, not a franchise that I have a huge amount of experience in, but more power to them. Super Mario Bros. Wonder, another game that I Let's Played. Goodness gracious, how many times can we talk about that with Serena? Great game. Great game. I talked about this in its own podcast episode, in its own segment, like my little review and thoughts on it. But I grew up a Nintendo fan, right? We've established that. Sure, I started with the Nintendo 64, but I played my fair share of side-scrollers and 2D platformers after I established how much I loved Nintendo, right? I'd go over to friends' house, play Super Nintendo's, NES. On Animal Crossing, the GameCube, you could play the original Mario Brothers game. All these things were available in arcades as well in certain places. That being said, Serena had never played a 2D platformer. She as well had had some semblance of like arcade experience in the last few years. There was an arcade that she and I used to go to when we lived in downtown Denver called 1UP. Very cute. The logo is just a 1UP, literally the mushroom. And they had Super Mario Bros. There, and we would play it together co-op. But she didn't really have any experience otherwise. So Super Mario Bros. Wonder was essentially her introduction to the genre. And it was a great one at that. What's more, you would think that someone's introduction to a specific genre, baby's first 2D platformer, would be boring or otherwise lame for someone with a little bit more experience like myself, but that's not the case. Super Mario Bros. Wonder kept it fresh, unique, and new in more ways than one, right? You talk about the Wonder Flowers, huge, innovative way to change up everything, because not only do they change like what you're doing specifically, but they oftentimes take the stage and just flip it on its head, for lack of a better word. I'm not trying to give out too many spoilers here if you haven't played it, but if you're in a certain stage and you're expecting a certain thing, it could continue the same after hitting the Wonder Flower, or, you would be doing something wild. Roll! Great game. Love it. WarioWare Move It. I'm a huge fan of WarioWare games. They are very stressful, for lack of a better term, very high energy, very eclectic in a way, in how they assemble their cast of characters and the games that they play. And I love it. I didn't unfortunately get a chance to play WarioWare yet, though I do have it. I need to set aside some time for that. I've been holding off perhaps for a stream with Serena, and we can do that together, and that would be great. But we do have different, opinions on stress-based games like that. She's perhaps not as, excited by them as I am. That being said, WarioWare for the DS was a game that I played over many car rides, and that was the last WarioWare game that I played prior to acquiring this one. So hopefully this is everything I dream it is. I'm sure it will be. Speaking of everything that I dream it is and meeting expectations, Super Mario RPG Remake. I got to play a very, very small amount of Super Mario RPG when I was younger. I mentioned going over to a friend's house who had a Super Nintendo. That's where I got that experience. But I never really played it. You know what I'm saying? I never really was able to sit down by myself and just immerse myself in the world and learn it. That changed with the remake. The Super Mario Brothers have always been a favorite of mine. RPGs have always been a favorite genre of mine. As such, I'm a huge fan of the Paper Mario series, and this is the game that started it all, right? Paper Mario 64 was originally supposed to be titled Super Mario RPG 2. So it's great that we now get the ability to play that title. And goodness gracious, is it great. I can't compare it too stringently to the original because, like I said, I haven't played it. But for what it is, dude, it is great. It is beautiful. The cutscenes are clearly something that were not available in the Super Nintendo version, and they are some of my favorite moments because they look beautiful. What's more, the music is amazing. The gameplay is as great as I would have thought, and it's proving to be a little bit longer of an adventure than I thought it was, which is excellent because typically games from the Super Nintendo era are not necessarily very much longer than like 20 hours. And I guess I haven't put exactly 20 hours into Mario RPG just yet, but I'm getting close, and it doesn't quite feel like I'm about to end it. Either way, great game. Very pleased for it. we shall see what's to come. Finally, everybody won to Switch. This was a game that had an interesting marketing push. I do remember that. The dude with the horse head, what have you. Didn't play it. Unfortunately, didn't play it. The marketing push stood out in my mind, but it didn't make me purchase the game. So if you played it, I'd be very encouraged or interested to hear what you have to say, because reviews of it were not widely available to me. Sure, I mean, you can get reviews for everything, but at least in like my innermost circles, I didn't know a whole lot of people that played it. So those do it for the games listed here. Of course, there were other games released, but for the quote-unquote heavy hitters, I suppose this is what the user listed out. Then there were also DLCs, like the large DLC for Xeno 3, Future Redeemed. As I understand it, that was just a massive, massive DLC, which is pretty close to a whole new game. Mario Kart 8 got several booster packs over the course of the year, and they were very well received by yours truly, as well as everyone else. In fact, I will probably do more streaming of that in the future, because I just absolutely adore them. And then Pokemon Scarlet and Violet got the Teal Mask and Indigo Disc. That being said, people have often had qualms with Scarlet and Violet, not for reasons of a lack of content, but, well, you know. Either way, 3 very important DLCs helping round out the gaming side of the house. Then in miscellaneous, the Super Mario Brothers movie. I mean, that can't be understated. All right, it raked in quite literally billions of dollars. So from a financial perspective, huge deal. From a Nintendo fan perspective, like you or I, also a huge deal, right? Because not only is this something that most of us have wanted for a long time, we've wanted it to succeed, right? Because it's one thing to force a company to churn out content, movies, what have you, and they just, they fall flat. We've seen that happen before, specifically with the 90s Mario movie. Cult classic in some people's opinions. There are people that do enjoy it, but by and large, not considered a, well, quality film. However, the Super Mario Brothers movie with Illumination, absolutely a quality film. Very well made. Sure, there is some pandering into there to certain demographics. It is a bit childish at times, but these are not things that we should have gone into it unprepared for, right? It's a gosh darn Nintendo movie. It's a Mario movie. It's going to be childish. It's going to be colorful. It's going to be goofy, and it's going to be a great freaking time. And that it was. I've watched it, oh goodness, about a half dozen times now. We'll probably continue to watch it in anticipation of, 1, its sequel, 2, the undoubtedly many sequels and spinoffs we'll get, and 3, the announced Zelda movie, which will be live action, so I'm very curious to see how that is. Point being here that Nintendo diversifying into the film industry with essentially all that they had, like this was a really significant push, paid off for them. Huge, 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 huge. Cannot be understated. In fact, I'd say that this is at least as big of a deal as any of these games. Even, dare I say, all of them, to be honest with you. And I'm not even a huge film fan, right? I am definitely video games first as far as entertainment mediums. But it just cannot be understated, the impact of the success of the Super Mario Brothers movie. Similarly, being, I guess, adjacent to video games, but aside from it, was the opening of the Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios Hollywood. So this didn't receive, I guess, as much fanfare as I would have hoped. Sure, initially, early on, it did. But by and large, it's kind of settled down. I haven't had the ability or the great honor of attending this place just yet. Hopefully, I will in 2024. But as I understand it from what I have seen and from what I have read, is that it is, you know, it's a Mario Park. There are like little Pikmin things scattered about and certain other references, but by and large, it's less Super Nintendo World and more Super Mario World. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but my point here is that there's room to expand and to improve, and I think that Nintendo knows that. In fact, I think that they probably considered this more of a trial run than anything, because now they do have plans to open up another location in Florida, which is where I currently live. Unfortunately, by the time it opens, I will no longer live here, so that's a different topic altogether. Anyways, the point here is that Nintendo probably saw this as a trial. It's going well enough for them to move forward with the opening of the second location. I hope that both of those locations do well enough for them to perhaps expand into their own standalone parks. You know what I'm saying? Instead of Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios, why not just Super Nintendo World? You know what I'm saying? I would go visit that. I would go visit that before I went to Universal Studios. Whether or not I'd go to before Disney World. Disney World's just so established, but it'd be right on par with it for me. So we'll see. Either which way, a great move, and I'd chalk that up as a success. We go down here, we can see that the user rated it an 8 out of 10 for saying that there's less heavy hitters. I'm not going to argue with them at all. I'm just going to mention my own rating here. I say it's a 10 out of 10, and I say there were tons of heavy hitters, all right? Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and I'd be curious to hear your opinion on what 2023 has meant for Nintendo. But I think it has been their most successful year in recent memory, arguably ever. Some people will point to 2017 being huge, and it was, with Breath of the Wild, the Nintendo Switch, and Mario Odyssey specifically headlining that year. But with this year, oh gosh, I think if there wasn't the movie in the park opening, that 2017 would probably take it. But these two side features push it over the edge for me. Either which way, though, we all can agree that it was a great year for Nintendo. A great year for Nintendo. I even skipped over F-Zero 99, but we talked about that earlier. Goodness gracious. So, again, I'm curious, your thoughts on your holiday memory, as well as your thoughts on Nintendo's 2023. I think great things of it, and I can't wait to see what's to come in 2024. We're all standing to benefit from it as Nintendo fans, and I can't wait to see it. Similarly, I can't wait to see you next podcast. So thank you so very much for watching. I sincerely do appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself. Happens every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, and I'll see you next week.